In my previous life, Chen Wei stood in the doorway of his Peking University dorm room, surrounded by boxes of expensive gifts from his new girlfriend's family, and delivered the words that shattered my world. "You're just dead weight now. I need someone who can match my level." The same mouth I had kissed goodnight 1,000 times after grueling tutoring sessions twisted into something cruel and unfamiliar. Thanks for the help getting in here, but let's be honest, you were holding me back. I had spent 18 months sacrificing my sleep, my health, my own academic dreams to tutor him through advanced mathematics and English literature. While he slept soundly in his bed, I stayed awake until 3 in the morning, creating practice exams tailored to his learning style. While he went on dates and hung out with friends, I worked part-time jobs to buy him textbooks and study guides. My own grades plummeted from exhaustion. My teachers stopped calling on me in class because I could barely keep my eyes open. And for what? So he could stand there in his crisp Peking University sweatshirt, already forgetting the girl who had made it possible. "Chen Wei, you can't be serious. After everything we've been through." "Everything we've been through?" He laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking. "You mean everything you dragged me through? Your constant worry about grades, your pathetic study schedules, your insecurity about whether I'd still want you once I got here. Li Xulan doesn't have any of those problems. She's confident, successful. She doesn't need me to carry her." Li Xulan, the wealthy business major whose father owned 3 luxury hotels in Beijing. I had seen her around campus during my visits, always impeccably dressed, always surrounded by equally polished friends. Chen Wei had mentioned her in passing, calling her just a study partner when I asked about the late-night group sessions I wasn't invited to. "You're replacing me with her?" My voice cracked, and I hated myself for showing weakness. "I'm not replacing you. I'm upgrading." He checked his expensive new watch, a gift I couldn't afford to give him. "Look, you should probably go. Zhulan's coming over in an hour, and I don't want things to be awkward." I stood there in the hallway, clutching the bag of homemade cookies I had brought him, watching him close the door in my face. 3 years of my life, 18 months of sleepless nights. My own acceptance letter to Beijing Normal University that I had deferred because I was too exhausted to take the entrance exam seriously. All of it meant nothing to him. I walked back to the train station in a daze, the weight of my foolishness crushing down on my chest. How had I been so blind? Every sign had been there. The way he stopped holding my hand when his new university friends were around. The way he forgot to mention social events until after they had happened. The way he started criticizing my appearance, my clothes, my small-town accent that suddenly seemed to embarrass him. The rain started as I waited for the train back home, and I didn't bother finding shelter. I deserved to be soaked. I deserved to catch pneumonia. I deserved every miserable thing that was about to happen to me because I had been stupid enough to believe that love meant sacrifice. The train was delayed. Of course it was. I stood there for 2 hours in the rain, replaying every moment of our relationship, looking for the exact point where I had stopped being his girlfriend and started being his unpaid tutor. When had "I love you" become "Can you help me with this assignment"? When had our study dates become him talking while I did his homework for him? By the time the train arrived, I was shivering uncontrollably and could barely see through my fever-hazed vision. I managed to find a seat, but the ride home was a blur of half-conscious misery. I kept thinking about Li Xulan's perfectly styled hair and designer handbags. I kept thinking about how Chen Wei had looked at her during the campus tour last month, the same way he used to look at me. I never made it home. The truck ran a red light at the intersection, 2 blocks from my apartment building. The driver said later that he couldn't see through the rain, that the impact happened too fast for him to brake. I died thinking about Chen Wei's new watch and wondering if he would even attend my funeral. But then I opened my eyes and found myself back in our senior year classroom, staring at the blackboard where Mr. Zhang was writing the date. September 1st. The exact day Chen Wei had first approached me for tutoring help. "Hey," Chen Wei whispered from the seat next to mine, flashing that boyish smile that had once made my heart race. "I heard you got the highest score on the practice exam. Think you could help me out? I'm really struggling with the advanced math section." This time, I looked him directly in the eyes and felt nothing but cold recognition. This time, I knew exactly who he was. The Peking University application deadline fell on a crisp November morning that felt heavy with possibility. I had arrived at the postal office early, clutching my carefully prepared application packet, transcripts showing my dramatic academic improvement, recommendation letters from 3 professors, my personal statement, and the scholarship committee's preliminary approval letter. In my previous life, this day had never come. I had been too exhausted from tutoring Chen Wei to maintain the grades necessary for Peking University consideration, and too financially stressed to afford the application fees for multiple universities. This time, I walked to the submission counter with steady hands and absolute confidence. "Peking University application?" the postal clerk asked, noting the address on my envelope. "Yes," I replied, unable to keep the pride from my voice. "Good luck," she said warmly. "They're lucky to have students like you applying." As I walked back toward campus, I spotted a familiar figure sitting on the steps of the administration building. Chen Wei looked smaller, somehow, hunched over his phone with an expression of desperate concentration. His usual confident posture had been replaced by something that looked like barely contained panic. When he saw me approaching, he stood up abruptly. "Wait," he called out, jogging to intercept my path. "I need to talk to you." I stopped walking, but didn't move closer. After everything that had happened, I was curious to hear what he could possibly have left to say. "I know you probably don't want to hear this," he began, his voice lacking its usual smooth confidence. "But I'm in serious trouble, and you're the only person who can help me." The audacity was breathtaking. After the plagiarism investigation, the fabricated video evidence, and his recommendation for expulsion, Chen Wei was still trying to position himself as someone deserving of my assistance. "Help you with what, exactly?" I asked coldly. "The application deadline. I know I messed up, and I know you have every right to hate me, but I can't get into any decent university now. My transcript is destroyed, my recommendation letters have been withdrawn, and no one will vouch for my character." His voice cracked slightly. "But you could." I stared at him for a long moment, trying to process the sheer magnitude of his entitlement. "You want me to help you with university applications? I know how it sounds, but think about it. You've always been better at this academic stuff than me. You could help me write a personal statement that explains the misunderstandings about the plagiarism allegations. You could help me find professors who might be willing to write new recommendation letters." Misunderstandings. He was still calling his systematic academic fraud a misunderstanding. "And why," I said slowly, "would I want to help the person who spent months trying to destroy my academic reputation?" "Because that's who you are," Chen Wei said, and for the first time, his voice took on a note of pleading. "You've always been the kind of person who helps others, even when they don't deserve it. It's what makes you special." I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. In my previous life, he had used similar language to manipulate me into endless self-sacrifice. He had convinced me that my willingness to give endlessly was a virtue, when in reality, it had been a weakness he could exploit. "You want to know what makes me special?" I asked quietly. "Learning to distinguish between helping people who deserve it and enabling people who will never change. Please." The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "I know I treated you badly. I know I took advantage of your kindness. But I can change. I can be better." I looked at his face, noting the dark circles under his eyes, and the way his hands trembled slightly. This was not the confident, charming boy who had once convinced me to sacrifice my own dreams for his benefit. This was someone facing the complete collapse of everything he had built through manipulation and theft. In my previous life, this moment would have broken my heart. I would have seen his vulnerability as proof that he truly cared about me, and I would have convinced myself that helping him recover was the loving thing to do. But I remembered his cruel words when he had discarded me. "You're just dead weight now." I remembered dying alone in the rain, thinking about his new girlfriend and his expensive watch. I remembered every night I had spent tutoring him while my own future slipped away. "Do you remember what you said to me the day you broke up with me in your dorm room?" I asked. Chen Wei's face went pale. "That was different. I was stressed about starting university, and I said things I didn't mean. You said I was dead weight. You said you needed someone who could match your level." I stepped closer, watching him flinch. "Well, congratulations, Chen Wei. You found your level. It's exactly where mine used to be when I was carrying you." "That's not fair. You know I cared about you. What we had was real." "What we had," I said with crystal clarity, "was you using me as your personal academic assistant while convincing me it was love? What we had was you taking credit for my insights while making me feel grateful for the privilege of helping you succeed." Chen Wei opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop him. "The difference between us is that when I failed, I learned to succeed on my own. When you fail, you look for someone else to carry you." I adjusted my bag strap and prepared to walk away. "I'm not your safety net anymore. I'm not anyone's safety net anymore." "So that's it?" His voice rose with a note of anger that reminded me of the boy who had once threatened to break up with me if I didn't help him cheat on a chemistry exam. "You're just going to abandon me when I need you most?" I turned back one last time, struck by the perfect irony of his words. "Chen Wei, you abandoned me the moment you got what you wanted from me. The difference is that when you abandoned me, I died. When I abandon you, you just have to live with the consequences of your own choices." I walked away without looking back, leaving him standing on the steps like the relic of a life I had chosen to leave behind. That evening, Liu Mei found me in my dormitory room, reviewing practice interview questions for the scholarship committee meeting. "Zhang Wei told me about your encounter with Chen Wei today," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "How are you feeling?" "Free," I said, and meant it. For the first time since I was reborn, I feel completely free of him. "Good, because I have news that might interest you." Liu Mei grinned. Chen Wei's last-ditch application to Beijing Normal University was rejected. Apparently, word of his academic misconduct has spread to other admissions committees. In my previous life, Beijing Normal University had been my dream school, the realistic option I had settled for when Peking University seemed impossibly out of reach. The irony that Chen Wei was now being rejected from the school I had once considered beneath my abilities was not lost on me. "There's more," Liu Mei continued. "Li Xulan broke up with him yesterday. She told Zhang Kui that she couldn't be with someone who had built their entire relationship on lies about who they really were." I felt a moment of genuine sympathy for Li Xulan. In her own way, she had been manipulated just as thoroughly as I had, though her family's wealth had protected her from the worst consequences. "And the best part," Liu Mei said, saving her most satisfying news for last, "is that Chen Wei's parents have apparently cut off his allowance and told him he'll need to support himself through community college if he wants to continue his education." Community college. The boy who had once dismissed my dreams as too small was now facing a future even smaller than the one I had originally planned for myself. I closed my practice interview materials and looked around my small dormitory room. Tomorrow, I would interview for a scholarship that would pay for any university in China. Next week, I would likely receive acceptance letters from schools that had once seemed impossibly beyond my reach. Chen Wei's manipulation had cost him everything: his academic reputation, his family's financial support, his girlfriend, and his future prospects. My refusal to continue enabling him had freed me to pursue everything I had ever wanted. In my previous life, I had believed that love meant endless self-sacrifice. Now I understood that love, real love, meant believing that people were capable of earning what they wanted through their own efforts. Chen Wei had never learned that lesson, and now it was too late. My wonderful life was just beginning, and it would be built on foundations that no one could steal from me. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by a courier who required my signature and seemed almost as excited as I was. "Peking University?" he asked, noting the official seal on the thick envelope. "Congratulations. My daughter dreams of going there someday." I signed for the package with hands that trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the sheer weight of possibility. In my previous life, I had never even dared to apply. The very idea of competing with the nation's brightest students had seemed absurd for a girl whose grades were barely above average due to chronic exhaustion. Back in my dormitory room, I opened the envelope carefully and read the first line. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted for early admission to Peking University's Mathematics Department with a full academic excellence scholarship." Full scholarship. Not only had they accepted me, but they had awarded me the most prestigious funding available: tuition, room and board, research stipend, and priority placement in advanced programs. I sat on my bed holding the letter, reading it over and over, until the words blurred together. This wasn't just acceptance. This was recognition that I belonged among the best students in the country. My phone rang almost immediately. Liu Mei's name appeared on the screen. "Please tell me that was your acceptance letter I saw being delivered," she said without preamble. "Early admission with full scholarship," I managed to say. Her shriek of excitement was so loud that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "I'm coming over right now. We're celebrating." 20 minutes later, Liu Mei burst into my room carrying a bag of snacks and wearing the biggest smile I had ever seen. "I am so proud of you," she said, pulling me into a fierce hug. "You deserve this more than anyone else in our entire school." "It still doesn't feel real," I admitted, looking at the letter again. "Well, it better start feeling real, because Zhang Wei just texted me that someone else got some very different news today." I looked up sharply. Chen Wei. Rejected from his last 3 backup schools. Beijing Normal, Capital Normal, even the local technical college. Liu Mei's expression grew serious. Zhang Wei said his parents told him he'll need to take a gap year and reapply next cycle, assuming he can find someone willing to write him recommendation letters by then. The irony was perfect. While I was celebrating acceptance to the country's most prestigious university, Chen Wei was facing the prospect of no higher education at all. His systematic academic fraud had not only destroyed his current prospects, but had made him virtually unemployable for future opportunities. "There's something else," Liu Mei continued. "Li Xulan stopped by the basketball courts this morning to return some things Chen Wei had left at her apartment." Zhang Wei said the conversation got pretty heated. "What happened?" Apparently Chen Wei tried one last time to convince her that the plagiarism allegations were exaggerated, that he had been unfairly targeted because of his relationship with you. Liu Mei rolled her eyes. Li Xulan told him that she had seen the evidence herself, and that she was tired of being lied to. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and genuine sympathy for Li Xulan. In my previous life, she had been the symbol of everything I wasn't sophisticated enough to be. Now I understood that she, like me, had simply been another target for Chen Wei's manipulation. "The best part," Liu Mei said, settling into my desk chair, "is what she said when he asked if there was any chance they could work things out." "What did she say?" "That she had finally learned to tell the difference between someone who loved her and someone who loved what she could do for them." Liu Mei grinned. "Sound familiar?" It did sound familiar. It was exactly the lesson I had learned through death and rebirth, the difference between people who valued you as a person and people who valued you as a resource. That afternoon, I called my parents to share the news. My mother answered on the first ring, as if she had been waiting by the phone. "Peking University," she exclaimed after I read her the acceptance letter. "With full scholarship. Sweetheart, I'm crying. Your father is crying. The neighbors are probably going to think someone died because we're making so much noise." I could hear my father's voice in the background, asking her to put me on speaker. "We always knew you were special," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But this is beyond our wildest dreams for you." "It's beyond my wildest dreams too," I admitted. "In September, I'll be studying advanced mathematics at the best university in the country." "You've earned every bit of this success," my mother said firmly. "All those late nights studying, all that determination to improve your grades. This is what hard work looks like when it pays off." Late nights studying. If only they knew that in my previous life, those late nights had been spent tutoring someone else while my own education suffered. The irony that my parents were praising my hard work, when in reality my success came from finally choosing to work hard for myself, was not lost on me. After we hung up, I walked to the campus courtyard where students often gathered to study or socialize. Spring had arrived early this year, and the cherry blossoms were blooming in delicate pink clusters that made the entire campus look like something from a painting. I found an empty bench near the library and sat down to read my acceptance letter one more time. As I was reading, I noticed a familiar figure approaching from across the courtyard. Chen Wei walked toward me with the same hesitant gait I had seen outside the administration building. But this time, his appearance was even more disheveled. His clothes looked slept in, his hair was unwashed, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "I heard about your acceptance," he said when he reached my bench. "Congratulations." I looked up at him, noting how different he seemed from the confident boy who had once made me feel so inadequate. "Thank you. I also wanted you to know that I'm taking a gap year, reassessing my options." He sat down on the opposite end of the bench without being invited. "I've had time to think about everything that happened between us, and I realize I owe you a real apology." I continued reading my acceptance letter without responding. "I know I hurt you. I know I took advantage of your kindness and treated you badly when you deserved better." His voice took on that pleading tone I had heard during our last confrontation. "But I want you to know that I'm going to use this year to become a better person. Someone who deserves your forgiveness." I folded the letter carefully and looked at him with genuine curiosity. "Why does my forgiveness matter to you?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. Because what we had was important. You were important to me. Important enough to treat with basic respect? I was young and stupid. I made mistakes. Chen Wei. I interrupted him gently. You didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You chose to take credit for my work. You chose to lie about our relationship dynamics. You chose to fabricate evidence against me when your other manipulations failed. He opened his mouth to argue, but I continued. And now you're choosing to characterize systematic manipulation as youthful mistakes because taking responsibility would require admitting that you knowingly hurt people for your own benefit. That's not fair. I'm trying to apologize. You're trying to make yourself feel better about the consequences of your actions. I stood up, clutching my acceptance letter. But your feelings about what you did are not my responsibility anymore. I started to walk away, then turned back one last time. I hope you do become a better person during your gap year. Not because I need your improvement for closure, but because the people you meet in the future deserve better than who you've been. As I walked back toward my dormitory, I heard Chen Wei call after me. So that's it? After everything we shared, you can just walk away? I didn't turn around. but I smiled. Everything we shared. Even now, Chen Wei couldn't acknowledge that our shared experiences had been fundamentally unequal. I had shared my knowledge, my time, my energy, and my dreams. He had shared nothing except his willingness to take what I offered. But that imbalance was no longer my concern. I had Peking University to look forward to, advanced mathematics to master, and a future that belonged entirely to me. In my previous life, I had died believing that Chen Wei's success was worth more than my own dreams. Now I understood that the only person's success I was responsible for was my own, and my success was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the main courtyard of Peking University, surrounded by towering academic buildings and centuries of scholarly tradition. The September air carried the excitement of new beginnings, and freshmen moved across campus with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation that I remembered feeling just months ago. But I was no longer that uncertain girl. I belonged here. My advanced mathematics program was everything I had dreamed it would be in my previous life, and more. Professor Chen, no relation to the Chen Wei of my past, had already invited me to assist with his graduate-level research on differential equations. My classmates were brilliant and driven, the kind of intellectual peers Chen Wei had once convinced me I wasn't smart enough to befriend. "You're adapting remarkably well," Professor Chen had told me just last week after I had presented a solution to a problem that had stumped several graduate students. Students typically need a full semester to reach this level of analytical thinking. If only he knew that I had reached this level years ago, but had spent my time explaining concepts to someone else instead of developing them myself. My dormitory room overlooked the campus lake, where students often studied under the willow trees or took evening walks between classes. It was a view I had admired during my brief visits in my previous life, when I had come to see Chen Wei and felt like an outsider looking into a world I could never be part of. Now this world was mine. I was settling down for an evening study session when Liu Mei called. She had been accepted to Beijing Normal University, my old dream school, and was thriving in her education program. "I have news you might find interesting," she said, after we had caught up on our respective academic adventures. "Zhang Wei ran into Chen Wei last week." I looked up from my differential equations textbook. I hadn't thought about Chen Wei in months, and hearing his name felt like remembering a character from a book I had read long ago. "How is he?" I asked, surprised to find that I felt genuinely curious rather than bitter. "Not well, apparently. He's been working at his uncle's restaurant while taking community college courses at night. Zhang Wei said he looked exhausted and much older than when we graduated." I tried to picture Chen Wei, who had once been so concerned with his image and social status, working in a restaurant kitchen and struggling through remedial college courses. The boy who had dismissed my dreams as too small was now living a life smaller than anything I had ever imagined for myself. "There's more," Liu Mei continued. "He asked Zhang Wei about you. Specifically, he wanted to know if you were still angry about what happened between you." The phrasing was so perfectly Chen Wei, reframing his systematic manipulation and academic fraud as some vague, mutual conflict where blame could be shared equally. "What did Zhang Wei tell him?" "That you never talked about him anymore, and that you seemed genuinely happy with your new life." Chen Wei apparently looked shocked, like he couldn't believe you had moved on completely. I understood his shock. In his mind, the relationship between us had been the most important thing in my world, significant enough that its destruction should have left lasting scars. The idea that I could be thriving without any reference to him would be incomprehensible to someone who had always seen himself as the center of other people's stories. Zhang Wei said Chen Wei asked if there was any chance you might be willing to meet with him during winter break. He wanted to clear the air and make sure there were no hard feelings. I laughed, and the sound felt light and free. "No hard feelings? I don't have any feelings about Chen Wei at all anymore. That's not the same thing." That weekend, I was studying in the university library when a girl from my advanced calculus class approached my table. Her name was Wang Ling, and she had quickly become one of my closest friends in the program. "Someone's been asking around about you," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "A guy from outside the university. He claimed to be an old friend, but he was asking very specific questions about your academic performance and social connections." I felt a familiar chill of recognition. "What kind of questions?" "Whether you were struggling with any courses, whether you seemed lonely or homesick, whether you had mentioned any regrets about your university choice." Wang Ling frowned. It was weird enough that I asked around, and apparently he approached several other students with similar questions. Chen Wei. Even now, months after our final confrontation, he was still trying to find ways back into my life. But his approach had evolved. Instead of direct manipulation, he was gathering intelligence about potential vulnerabilities he could exploit. "Did anyone tell him anything useful?" I asked. "That's the thing. Nobody had anything negative to report. You're at the top of your classes. You have strong friendships. You seem completely content with your life here." Wang Ling grinned. "I think he was expecting to hear that you were struggling or unhappy, and when he didn't get that information, he just left." I imagined Chen Wei walking away from those conversations, frustrated by his inability to find any crack in the life I had built. In his understanding of the world, my success should have come with corresponding misery that he could alleviate by inserting himself back into my story as a savior. But I wasn't miserable. I was thriving. That evening, I called my parents for our weekly check-in. The pride in their voices had never faded, even after months of my academic success. If anything, they seemed more amazed each week as my professors continued to praise my work and invite me into advanced research opportunities. "Your mathematics professor called the house yesterday," my father said during our conversation. "He wanted to discuss summer research programs at international universities. Apparently, several institutions are interested in your work." International research programs. In my previous life, such opportunities had seemed as fantastical as space travel. Now they were natural extensions of the academic path I was building through my own efforts. "How do you feel about the possibility of studying abroad?" my mother asked. "Excited," I said honestly, "and grateful that I have the choice." After we hung up, I walked out to the campus lake and sat on one of the benches where students often came to think or study. The evening was peaceful, with only a few other students scattered around the area, absorbed in their books or conversations. I thought about the girl I had been in my previous life, so eager to please, so willing to sacrifice her own dreams for someone else's approval, so convinced that her value came from what she could do for other people rather than who she was as an individual. That girl had died in a car accident while chasing someone who had already discarded her. But in a strange way, her death had been a gift. It had freed me to become the person I was always meant to be, unburdened by the need to make myself small so that others could feel large. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Chen Wei. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I've learned from my mistakes, and I hope someday we can be friends again. I miss talking to someone as intelligent as you." I read the message twice, noting the familiar patterns of manipulation embedded in seemingly humble language, the acknowledgement of wrongdoing that stopped short of taking responsibility, the flattery designed to make me feel special, the implication that he had changed without any evidence of actual growth. In my previous life, this message would have sent me into hours of agonized analysis, wondering whether he was sincere and whether I owed him another chance. This time, I simply deleted it and put my phone away. The past was no longer important. What mattered was that my life was now filled with light, the light of genuine achievement, authentic relationships, and a future that belonged entirely to me. I looked out over the campus lake, watching the sunset reflect off the water in shades of gold and amber. Tomorrow I would attend advanced seminars with professors who valued my insights, work on research projects that challenged my abilities, and build friendships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. Chen Wei could spend his gap year working in restaurants and sending manipulative text messages to a girl who no longer existed. I would spend my time becoming the mathematician, the scholar, and the woman I was always meant to be. My wonderful life was no longer just beginning. It was happening, every day, built on foundations that no one could steal or undermine because they came from within myself. And that was the most satisfying revenge of all, not just that Chen Wei had lost everything, but that I had gained everything he had tried to convince me I didn't deserve. I stood up from the bench and walked back toward my dormitory, my steps light with the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new achievements, and new possibilities that belonged completely to me. The girl who had once died for love had been reborn to live for herself. And that life was beautiful, beyond anything I had ever dared to imagine. I stared at Chen Wei for a long moment, watching confusion flicker across his features as the silence stretched between us. In my previous life, I had immediately agreed to help him, so eager to please that I hadn't even asked what was in it for me. This time, I let him squirm. "No," I said simply, turning back to my notebook. "What?" His voice cracked slightly, as if he couldn't believe what he had heard. "But you're the best student in our class. I really need—" I said no. I didn't bother looking up from my notes. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was reviewing the same advanced calculus problems I had spent countless hours explaining to him in my past life. Problems that I understood perfectly, but had been too exhausted to apply to my own exam preparation. Chen Wei leaned closer, lowering his voice to that intimate tone he used when he wanted something. "Come on, don't be like this. We're friends, right? I'd do the same for you." How laughable. In 3 years of dating, Chen Wei had never once offered to help me with anything. When I struggled with ancient Chinese literature, he was always too busy. When I needed someone to quiz me for oral exams, he had basketball practice, or video games, or literally anything else to do. "We're not friends," I replied coolly. "We're classmates. And I'm busy." I could feel his shock radiating from the seat beside me. This was not the script he remembered. In our past life, I had been so grateful for his attention, so desperate to be useful to him, that I would have tutored him for free, even if he hadn't been my boyfriend. But he wasn't my boyfriend this time. This time, I knew exactly where his charm led. After class, I walked directly to the guidance counselor's office and signed up for the advanced mathematics and English supplementary courses, the same courses I had skipped in my previous life because Chen Wei had convinced me they were too competitive and not worth the stress. He had told me that spending time together was more important than chasing perfect grades. What he had really meant was that my time belonged to him. Mrs. Liu, the guidance counselor, looked surprised when I handed in my enrollment forms. "These are quite challenging courses, dear. Are you sure you want to add them to your already heavy schedule?" "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I want to maximize my chances for Peking University." The words felt foreign in my mouth. In my previous life, Peking University had seemed like an impossible dream, something for students like Chen Wei, who had personal tutors and wealthy families. I had set my sights lower, convincing myself that Beijing Normal University was more realistic for someone like me. But I had been the one with the highest practice exam scores. I had been the one who could solve advanced calculus problems in my head while half asleep. I had been the one with the natural talent that Chen Wei had borrowed and never returned. "Excellent," Mrs. Liu smiled warmly. "I'll make sure you receive all the supplementary materials. The first session is tomorrow after regular classes." As I walked back to my dorm room, I passed Chen Wei in the hallway. He was surrounded by his usual group of basketball teammates, but his eyes followed me with an expression I had never seen before. uncertainty, perhaps even a flicker of panic. "Hey, wait up," he called out, jogging to catch up with me. His friends continued on without him, shooting curious glances over their shoulders. I stopped walking but didn't turn around. "What do you want, Chen Wei?" "I want to know what's gotten into you today. You're acting strange." He moved to stand in front of me, blocking my path. "Did I do something to upset you?" The audacity was breathtaking. In my previous life, this exact conversation had happened, but I had been the one asking if I had done something wrong. I had been the one apologizing for imaginary slights and begging for his forgiveness. "Nothing's gotten into me. I'm just focused on my own studies now." I stepped around him and kept walking. "Your own studies?" He fell into step beside me, his voice taking on that wheedling tone I remembered so well. "But we always helped each other. Remember freshman year when you explained that chemistry formula to me? Or last month when I helped you with that history essay?" I stopped walking and turned to face him fully. The history essay. In my previous life, I had been so grateful for his help that I had bought him dinner and thanked him profusely. It wasn't until months later that I realized he had simply copied paragraphs from online sources and passed them off as his own insights. His help had nearly gotten me accused of plagiarism. "You mean when you copied 3 paragraphs from Baidu and told me they were your original thoughts?" I asked sweetly. The color drained from his face. "How did you— I was just trying to help you brainstorm." "Save it," I resumed walking. "I don't need that kind of help." Chen Wei grabbed my arm, his fingers tightening, just enough to stop me from moving forward. In my previous life, I had found his possessiveness romantic. Now it just felt pathetic. "Look, if this is about money, I can pay you. My parents gave me extra allowance this semester for tutoring expenses." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded stack of bills. "How about 50 yuan per session? That's more than fair." 50 yuan. In my previous life, I had tutored him for free for 18 months, sacrificing my own sleep and study time, and he thought 50 yuan per session was generous. I had worked part-time jobs that paid twice that hourly rate just to buy him the textbooks he needed. I looked down at his hand, still gripping my arm, then back up at his face. "Let go of me." Something in my tone made him release me immediately. "I'm just trying to understand what changed. Yesterday you were happy to help with my chemistry homework. Yesterday. In this timeline, yesterday I had still been the naive girl who thought love meant endless self-sacrifice. Yesterday I had still believed that if I just gave enough of myself, he would eventually value what I had to offer. But that was before I remembered dying alone in the rain, thinking about his new watch. Yesterday I was a different person," I said quietly. "Today I choose myself." I left him standing in the hallway, mouth agape, as I walked away without looking back. That evening, I spread my new supplementary course materials across my desk and felt something I hadn't experienced in my previous life: excitement about my own future. These problems that had once seemed impossible suddenly looked like puzzles waiting to be solved. Without Chen Wei's constant demands for attention, without the emotional exhaustion of being his unpaid academic assistant, my mind felt clear and sharp. My phone buzzed with a text message. Chen Wei, of course. "I don't know what I did wrong, but I'm sorry. Can we talk tomorrow?" I deleted the message without responding. In my previous life, I had spent so many nights waiting for his apologies, treasuring each reluctant sorry as if it were a declaration of love. Now I understood that his apologies had never been about acknowledging wrongdoing. They had been about maintaining access to my labor. My wonderful life was just beginning. 3 weeks into the semester, the results of our first major practice exam were posted on the bulletin board outside the main office. I pushed through the crowd of anxious students, my heart beating steadily as I scanned the rankings. There it was. My name in the number 4 position, with a score of 647 out of 650. In my previous life, I had scored a devastating 512 on this same exam, too exhausted from late-night tutoring sessions to concentrate properly. I had cried in the bathroom afterward while Chen Wei celebrated his respectable 580, which I had essentially earned for him through weeks of intensive preparation. This time, Chen Wei's name appeared at position 37 with a score of 471. Barely passing. Impossible, someone whispered behind me. I turned to see Chen Wei staring at the board with a look of genuine shock. There has to be a mistake. What's impossible about it? Liu Mei, one of my advanced course classmates, appeared beside me with a wide grin. Congratulations. I knew those supplementary classes would pay off. Liu Mei. In my previous life, I had barely known her beyond polite nods in the hallway. Chen Wei had always dismissed her as too competitive and discouraged me from forming friendships with top-performing students, claiming they would make me feel insecure about my own abilities. Now I realized he had been afraid they would show me what I was capable of without him dragging me down. Thank you, I replied warmly. Your study group techniques really helped with the essay portion. Study group? Chen Wei's voice cut through our conversation. He moved closer, his usual confident smile looking strained around the edges. You didn't mention you joined a study group. The possessiveness in his tone was exactly the same as I remembered. In my past life, I had immediately apologized and explained that it wasn't really a study group, just some casual review sessions, anything to ease the jealousy that would inevitably lead to hours of exhausting reassurance. Why would I need to mention it? I asked mildly. We're not dating. Chen Wei's face flushed red. Several students nearby had stopped their own conversations to listen, drawn by the tension in his voice. I know we're not dating, but I thought we were still friends. Friends tell each other about these things. Liu Mei glanced between us with obvious confusion. Wait, you two aren't together. But Chen Wei, didn't you say last month that... That was a misunderstanding, I interrupted smoothly. Chen Wei sometimes has trouble distinguishing between friendship and something more meaningful. The crowd around the bulletin board had grown larger, and I could see other students exchanging meaningful glances. Chen Wei's reputation as the charming basketball star who always got what he wanted was beginning to show cracks. Can we talk privately? He asked through gritted teeth. I don't think that's necessary. Anything you have to say to me can be said here. I folded my arms and waited. In my previous life, this moment had never happened because I had been too afraid of public confrontation to stand up to him. I had always retreated to private spaces where he could manipulate me without witnesses. Chen Wei looked around at the curious faces surrounding us and seemed to realize he was trapped. Fine. I just wanted to say congratulations on your score. I'm proud of you. The words sounded hollow, and I could see Liu Mei's expression shift as she picked up on his insincerity. Thank you, I replied coolly. I'm proud of myself too. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you focus on your own goals instead of other people's problems. He flinched as if I had slapped him. Right. Well, I should probably get to basketball practice. As he walked away, Liu Mei turned to me with raised eyebrows. That was intense. What's the history between you two? I watched Chen Wei's retreating figure and felt something I had never experienced in my previous life. Complete indifference to his emotional state. There is no history, just someone who thought I owed him my time and energy. Good for you for setting boundaries, Liu Mei said firmly. Some guys think being nice to them means you're obligated to be their personal tutor. If only she knew how accurate that assessment was. That afternoon, I attended my advanced mathematics supplementary session with Professor Wang, the most demanding teacher in our school. In my previous life, I had been too intimidated to even consider his classes, convinced by Chen Wei that I wasn't smart enough for such rigorous coursework. Excellent work on the practice exam, Professor Wang said, as I took my seat in the front row. Your analytical approach to the calculus problems was particularly impressive. Have you considered pursuing mathematics at the university level? The question caught me off guard. In my previous life, no teacher had ever suggested I had academic potential beyond the bare minimum. Chen Wei had always been the one receiving encouragement and praise, while I remained invisible in the background. I hadn't really thought about it, I admitted. You should. Students with your natural ability are rare. I'd be happy to write a recommendation letter when application season arrives. Professor Wang handed me an additional problem set. These are from last year's Peking University entrance exam. Consider them a challenge. Peking University problems. In my previous life, I had spent months helping Chen Wei work through similar practice sets, explaining concepts over and over, until he could barely scrape together passing solutions. Now I was being given the same level of work as recognition of my own abilities. I spent the rest of the session working through differential equations that would have taken Chen Wei weeks to understand. The problems flowed logically from one step to the next, and I found myself thinking several moves ahead, anticipating complications and preparing solutions before they became necessary. It was intoxicating. After class, I walked back to the dormitory feeling more confident than I ever had in either lifetime. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This is Li Xulan from Class 3. Chen Wei gave me your contact info. He said you're the best tutor in school, and that I should ask you for help with mathematics. I can pay very well. Please call me. Li Xulan. Chen Wei's future girlfriend, already circling like a vulture. In my previous life, they had met during a group study session that I had organized, but been too sick to attend. Chen Wei had spent the evening explaining concepts I had taught him, taking credit for my insights, and impressing her with knowledge that wasn't his own. I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering the designer handbags and expensive jewelry, the way Chen Wei had looked at her like she was everything I could never be, remembering how quickly he had discarded 3 years of our relationship the moment something shinier came along. I deleted the message without responding. In my previous life, I had spent so much time wondering what Li Xulan had that I didn't. Now I understood the answer. She had never made the mistake of giving Chen Wei anything for free. She had never taught him her value by undervaluing herself. That evening, I called my parents for our weekly check-in. In my previous life, these conversations had been stilted affairs where I downplayed my academic struggles and pretended everything was fine. I had been too ashamed to admit that I was failing because I was prioritizing someone else's education over my own. "Sweetheart, you sound different," my mother observed. "Happier." "I am happier," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. "I'm focusing on my studies and it's going really well. I think I might actually have a chance at Peking University." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. In my previous life, I had never dared to dream so big out loud. "Of course you do," my father's voice came through the speaker. "You've always been brilliant. We just worried you weren't pushing yourself hard enough." They had worried I wasn't pushing myself hard enough. All this time, I had thought they believed I lacked ability, when in reality, they had seen my potential being wasted. "I'm pushing myself now," I promised, "and it feels wonderful." After hanging up, I looked around my small dormitory room with fresh eyes. In my previous life, this space had felt like a prison, where I counted down the hours between Chen Wei's demands for help. Tonight, it felt like a sanctuary, where I could pursue my own dreams without interruption. My wonderful life was just beginning, and Chen Wei was no longer part of it. The rumors started the next week. "I heard she's become really arrogant since her test scores improved," someone whispered behind me in the cafeteria. "Apparently she thinks she's too good for her old friends now." I didn't need to turn around to know who had started spreading this particular story. Chen Wei had always been skilled at rewriting history when things didn't go his way. In my previous life, when I had briefly tried to assert myself during our sophomore year, he had convinced half our class that I was going through a phase and being unnecessarily dramatic. "She used to be so sweet and helpful," another voice chimed in. "Now she won't even help people with homework. It's like success went to her head." Liu Mei slid her tray across from mine and sat down heavily. "You know what they're saying about you, right?" "I can imagine." I took a bite of my rice, unbothered. "Let me guess. I've become selfish and cold since my grades improved." "Something like that." Liu Mei frowned. "Chen Wei's been telling people that you used to tutor him regularly until you decided you were above helping classmates. He's making it sound like you abandoned him out of nowhere." The audacity was breathtaking, but not surprising. In my previous life, Chen Wei had used similar tactics when I had briefly joined the debate club without asking his permission first. He had convinced our mutual friends that I was pulling away from everyone and getting too caught up in activities. I had quit the club within 2 weeks, apologizing to him for making him feel neglected. "What exactly did he say?" I asked, with genuine curiosity. "That you two were close friends who studied together all the time, that he's worried about you because you've been acting strange and distant, that maybe the pressure of advanced classes is getting to you." Liu Mei rolled her eyes. "He's actually pretty convincing. Some people are starting to think you're having some kind of breakdown." I couldn't help but laugh. "A breakdown that resulted in the 4th highest test scores in school? That's quite a theory. I know it's garbage, but you should be aware that it's spreading. Zhang Wei from Class 2 asked me if you were okay, because Chen Wei seemed so concerned about your mental state." Zhang Wei. In my previous life, he had been one of Chen Wei's basketball teammates and a casual acquaintance of mine. I remembered him as generally decent, if somewhat easily influenced by stronger personalities. "And what did you tell him?" "That Chen Wei is full of shit and probably just mad that you're outperforming him academically." Liu Mei grinned, but I said it more diplomatically. That afternoon, I discovered just how far Chen Wei was willing to take his campaign of manipulation. When I returned to my dormitory room after Professor Wang's advanced mathematics session, I found my door slightly ajar. I always locked it carefully, a habit from my previous life, when Chen Wei had borrowed my textbooks without asking and returned them damaged. Inside, my desk had been subtly disturbed. My carefully organized notes were scattered, and my supplementary coursework materials had been moved. But more importantly, my practice exam workbooks were missing, the ones Professor Wang had given me with actual Peking University entrance problems. I stood in the doorway, feeling a cold rage settle in my chest. In my previous life, Chen Wei had occasionally borrowed my class notes and returned them days later, usually right before I needed them for my own studying. I had always given him the benefit of the doubt, assuming he was just disorganized. Now I understood it had been deliberate sabotage. I checked my closet and found my missing workbooks stuffed behind my winter coat, torn and water-damaged. Someone had deliberately poured liquid on them, probably from the water bottle I kept on my desk. My phone buzzed with a text message. Chen Wei, of course. "Hey, I heard some people broke into the dormitory building earlier today. You should check if anything is missing. I'm worried about you." The performance was masterful. He had created the crime and was now positioning himself as the concerned friend, warning me about it. In my previous life, this exact scenario had played out with my chemistry textbook right before a major exam. I had been so grateful for his concern that I had never questioned how he happened to know about the break-in before I did. I took photographs of the damaged materials and then called campus security to report the incident. When Officer Lee arrived 20 minutes later, I showed him the evidence and explained my suspicions. "This looks personal," he observed, examining the deliberately torn pages. "Someone wanted to hurt your academic performance specifically. Do you have any idea who might want to sabotage you? I have some suspicions, but no proof." "Well, We'll dust for fingerprints and check the security cameras for the building entrance. Whoever did this was either very stupid or very confident they wouldn't get caught. Officer Lee handed me a report number. In the meantime, I'd suggest being extra careful about locking your door and maybe not discussing your academic achievements quite so openly. The implication stung, but I understood his point. In his experience, victims usually bore some responsibility for making themselves targets. After he left, I sat on my bed and stared at the ruined workbooks. In my previous life, this kind of sabotage had always been devastating, because I had been too trusting to prepare for it. I had never made backup copies of important materials or taken precautions to protect my work. This time, I had scanned every page of those workbooks before even bringing them back to my room. I opened my laptop and printed fresh copies of all the damaged problems, then organized them into a new binder. The sabotage had cost Chen Wei whatever remained of his credibility with me, but it hadn't actually harmed my academic progress at all. My phone rang. Chen Wei's name appeared on the screen. "I just heard about the break-in," he said, when I answered. His voice was perfectly calibrated to sound concerned without being overly dramatic. "Are you okay? Did they take anything important?" "Some of my study materials were damaged," I replied neutrally. "That's terrible. Look, I know we've had our differences lately, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. If you need help replacing anything, or if you want someone to walk you back to your dorm after evening classes, just let me know." In my previous life, I would have been moved by his offer of protection. I would have seen his willingness to help as evidence that he truly cared about my well-being, despite our recent tensions. "That's very thoughtful," I said, "but I'm handling it fine on my own." "Are you sure? I hate to think of you dealing with this alone. Maybe we could study together again, like old times, just until this situation gets resolved and you feel safer." There it was, the real purpose of the sabotage: create a crisis, position himself as the solution, and gradually work his way back into my academic routine, where he could benefit from my knowledge while controlling my social connections. "I appreciate the offer, but I prefer studying alone now. It's more efficient." The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably long. "Right," he said finally. "Well, if you change your mind." "I won't." After I hung up, I leaned back against my pillow and smiled. In my previous life, Chen Wei's manipulations had worked because I had never seen them coming. I had interpreted his sabotage as bad luck and his subsequent offers of help as genuine kindness. But now I could see the pattern clearly. Create the problem, offer the solution, maintain control. It was elegant in its simplicity and absolutely disgusting in its execution. My phone buzzed with a text from Liu Mei. "Zhang Wei told me Chen Wei has been asking people if they think you're having emotional problems that might explain your recent behavior. Just thought you should know." I typed back quickly. "Let him dig his own grave. People will figure out what he's really like eventually." And they would. Because unlike my previous life, this time I wasn't going to help Chen Wei maintain his facade of being a caring, concerned friend. This time, I was going to let him show everyone exactly who he really was. 2 days after the break-in incident, Li Xulan approached me outside the library. I recognized her immediately. The same perfectly styled hair, the same designer handbag that probably cost more than my family's monthly income, the same confident stride that announced her presence before she even spoke. "You're the girl Chen Wei mentioned," she said without preamble. "The one who's supposed to be so brilliant at mathematics." I looked up from my textbook, taking in her expensive outfit and the way she stood with one hand on her hip, as if she owned the space around her. In my previous life, our first meeting had been at Chen Wei's university celebration party, where she had looked through me like I was furniture. I had spent that entire evening trying to make conversation with her, desperate to understand what Chen Wei saw in her that he didn't see in me. I'm sorry. Do we know each other? I asked politely. Li Xiulan, Class 3. She gestured toward an empty chair across from my study table. May I sit? I have a proposition for you. I nodded, curious to see how this version of events would unfold. Chen Wei tells me you're the best mathematics tutor in school, she continued, settling gracefully into the chair. He says you helped him improve his scores dramatically before you two had some kind of falling out. The revisionist history was impressive. Chen Wei had transformed 18 months of free labor into a brief tutoring arrangement that I had somehow ended out of spite. Chen Wei tends to exaggerate, I replied carefully. Perhaps, but your recent test scores speak for themselves. Li Xiulan leaned forward, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone. I'm struggling with advanced calculus, and my father is very concerned about my university entrance exam performance. He's willing to pay quite well for the right kind of help. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a leather portfolio, sliding it across the table toward me. Inside were several crisp 100 yuan bills, more money than I typically saw in a month. This would be for one session, she explained. If your teaching methods prove effective, we could arrange something more substantial. Perhaps 500 yuan per week for regular sessions. 500 yuan per week. In my previous life, I had worked a part-time job at a local restaurant for 12 hours every weekend, just to earn 300 yuan per month. The money Li Xiulan was offering casually would have solved every financial stress my family faced. But I remembered the university celebration party. I remembered the way she had laughed when Chen Wei introduced me as his girlfriend, as if the idea was somehow absurd. I remembered her asking him later, when she thought I couldn't hear, whether he was really serious about that little country girl. That's very generous, I said, closing the portfolio and sliding it back to her. But I'm not available for tutoring. Li Xiulan's eyebrows rose slightly. I'm sorry? I said I'm not available. I'm focusing on my own studies right now. I see. She reclaimed the portfolio, her fingers drumming against the leather surface. Chen Wei mentioned you might be difficult to convince. He said you've become rather particular about who you associate with since your grades improved. The implication hung in the air between us. In her world, refusing her money meant I thought I was too good for her business. The possibility that I simply didn't want to help her had never occurred to her. Chen Wei says a lot of things, I replied evenly. Most of them are designed to serve his own interests. Something shifted in Li Xiulan's expression. For the first time since she had sat down, she looked genuinely surprised. That's an interesting way to describe someone who speaks so highly of you, she said slowly. He told me you two were very close, that he was concerned about your recent change in behavior. We were never close. Chen Wei has a tendency to rewrite relationships to make himself look better. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Tell me, when he talks about our supposed friendship, does he mention how I spent 18 months tutoring him for free while my own grades suffered? Or does he skip that part? Li Xiulan's perfectly composed expression flickered. He said you helped each other study, that it was mutual. Mutual. I couldn't help but smile at that. What exactly did Chen Wei help me with? Can you think of a single specific example he gave you? The silence stretched between us, as Li Xiulan clearly tried to recall any mention of Chen Wei providing academic assistance to anyone other than himself. I thought not, I said gently. Chen Wei is very good at taking credit for other people's work, and even better at convincing others that his exploitation was actually a favor to his victims. That's a serious accusation, Li Xiulan said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's not an accusation. It's just a pattern you'll recognize eventually, if you pay attention. I gathered my textbooks and stood up. When you get tired of being his academic safety net, you'll understand why I refused to continue playing that role. I started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, And Li Xiulan? When Chen Wei inevitably starts pressuring you to share your family's business connections with him, remember this conversation. The color drained from her face. How did you? Because that's what Chen Wei does. He finds people with resources he wants and convinces them that helping him is somehow helping themselves. The only question is how long it will take you to figure out that the relationship is entirely one-sided. I left her sitting at the table, staring after me with the expression I had never seen on her face before. Doubt. That evening, Liu Mei found me in the dormitory common room, practically vibrating with excitement. "You have to hear this," she said, dropping into the chair beside me. "Zhang Wei told me the most interesting story about Li Xiulan and Chen Wei." "Oh?" Apparently, she cornered him after basketball practice today and started asking very pointed questions about his academic history. Specifically, she wanted to know if he had ever actually helped anyone else with their studies, or if he was always on the receiving end of assistance. I felt a small smile tug at the corner of my mouth. And what did Zhang Wei tell her? The truth, that Chen Wei has been getting help from smarter students since freshman year, but he's never offered to tutor anyone himself. Zhang Wei said Li Xiulan looked like someone had just told her that Santa Claus wasn't real. In my previous life, Li Xiulan had been attracted to Chen Wei's apparent academic success and social confidence. She had seen him as someone who could match her family's expectations for achievement and status. The idea that his accomplishments were largely borrowed from others would have been devastating to that image. "There's more," Liu Mei continued. "Chen Wei apparently got defensive when she started questioning him and said something about how you had been spreading lies about him out of jealousy. But instead of believing him, Li Xiulan asked Zhang Wei if you had ever seemed jealous of Chen Wei before. And Zhang Wei told her you had always been supportive of Chen Wei, sometimes to your own detriment, that it was actually pretty obvious you cared more about his success than your own." Liu Mei grinned. Apparently, Li Xiulan went very quiet after that. I closed my textbook and looked out the window at the campus courtyard where students were walking to and from evening classes. In my previous life, I had spent so much time wondering what Li Xiulan had that I lacked. Superior beauty, family wealth, social connections, all things that seemed to matter more than academic ability or personal loyalty. But now I understood that Li Xiulan's greatest advantage had never been her assets. It had been her refusal to give them away for free. "You know what's funny?" Liu Mei said thoughtfully. "Chen Wei actually did you a favor by introducing you to Li Xiulan. How do you figure? Because now she's asking questions about him that she never would have thought to ask otherwise. You planted a seed of doubt that's going to grow every time she notices him taking credit for other people's work." Liu Mei laughed. "He created his own worst enemy by trying to use her to get to you." My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Li Xiulan. I owe you an apology for my assumptions today. Would you be willing to meet for coffee sometime? Not for tutoring, just to talk." I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering the girl who had once made me feel so inadequate that I had questioned everything about my own worth. Now she was reaching out to me as an equal, perhaps even as someone she wanted to learn from. In my previous life, I would have been thrilled by her attention and desperate to prove myself worthy of her friendship. This time, I simply deleted the message. I had more important things to do than manage Li Xiulan's awakening to Chen Wei's true nature. My wonderful life was just beginning, and it had no room for people who needed dramatic revelations to treat others with basic respect. The morning of the national mock exam dawned grey and cold, with frost covering the dormitory windows. I woke early, feeling calm and prepared in a way that I had never experienced in my previous life. My desk was organized with backup pencils, a reliable calculator, and notes I had actually written myself, rather than copying from someone else's work. In my previous life, this same morning had been a nightmare. I had stayed up until 4 a.m., helping Chen Wei cram for sections he should have mastered months earlier. Then stumbled into my own exam exhausted and unfocused. My hands had shaken so badly from caffeine and sleep deprivation that I could barely write legibly. This time, I had gone to bed at 10 p.m. after a light review session and woken up refreshed. The examination hall buzzed with nervous energy as students filed in and found their assigned seats. I spotted Chen Wei 3 rows ahead of me, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. He kept turning around to scan the room, and when his eyes met mine, I saw him mouth the word, "Please." Please what? Please help him cheat? Please give him the answers I had worked so hard to understand. Please sacrifice my own performance to salvage his academic future. I looked away without acknowledging him. The exam began at 8 a.m. sharp, and for the next 4 hours I lost myself in the pure satisfaction of applying everything I had learned. The mathematics problems that had seemed impossible in my previous life now felt like puzzles with clear solutions. The essay questions about classical literature drew from texts I had actually read rather than borrowed summaries. When the proctor called time, I felt genuinely proud of my work. 3 days later, the results were posted outside the main office in order of citywide ranking. A crowd of students pressed forward, searching for their names and scores. I pushed through slowly, already knowing what I would find, but still feeling my heart race with anticipation. There it was, position number 3 in the entire city. Score, 689 out of 700. In my previous life, I had scored 398 and ranked 847th citywide. The shame of that failure had haunted me for months, especially when Chen Wei had scored a respectable 521 and spent weeks celebrating his solid performance. This time, Chen Wei's name appeared at position 423 with a score of 412, barely above failing. This can't be right, Chen Wei's voice carried over the crowd. He was staring at the board with genuine disbelief, his face pale and sweaty. There has to be some mistake. I've been studying for months. Studying what, exactly? The voice belonged to Teacher Huang, our class advisor, who had approached the bulletin board to review the results. Because your performance in my English literature section was particularly disappointing. You seem to confuse the themes of 3 different classical novels. I remembered that question. In my previous life, I had spent hours explaining the thematic differences between those exact novels to Chen Wei, creating detailed comparison charts and practice essays. This time, he had faced those questions without my insights to guide him. I must have been nervous, Chen Wei said weakly. Test anxiety, you know. I understand the material much better than this shows. Test anxiety doesn't typically cause someone to attribute quotes from Dream of the Red Chamber to Journey to the West, Teacher Huang replied dryly. That suggests a fundamental lack of familiarity with the source material. Several students nearby began whispering among themselves. Chen Wei's reputation as a solid student was crumbling in real time. Congratulations! Liu Mei appeared beside me, beaming with pride. 3rd in the city. That's incredible. Thank you, I replied, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. In my previous life, no one had congratulated me because there had been nothing to celebrate. Your parents must be so proud. Have you called them yet? I hadn't, actually. In my previous life, I had been too ashamed of my poor performance to contact my family for weeks. This time, I was almost afraid that sharing good news would somehow make it disappear. I should probably do that now, I said. As I walked back toward the dormitory to make the call, I heard Chen Wei's voice behind me. Wait, can we talk for a minute? I turned around to see him jogging to catch up, his face flushed with exertion and what looked like genuine desperation. "I need to understand what happened," he said breathlessly. "My scores have never been this low. Even my worst practice exams were better than this." "Maybe your worst practice exams weren't actually your own work," I suggested mildly. The comment hit its target. Chenwei flinched as if I had slapped him. "That's not fair. I've always done my own work on exams." "Have you? Or have you just been regurgitating explanations and insights that other people gave you?" I studied his face, noting the way his confidence seemed to crumble under direct questioning. "Tell me, Chenwei, when you answered the literature comparison question, did you try to remember what I had taught you about thematic analysis? Or did you actually engage with the texts yourself?" His silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought," I continued. "You've spent so much time having other people think for you that you've forgotten how to think for yourself." "I never asked you to think for me," he protested. "You offered to help. You wanted to study together." "I wanted to study together. You wanted me to do your intellectual labor while you took credit for the results." I turned to walk away, then paused. The difference is that I was naive enough to believe those were the same thing. That afternoon, I finally called my parents to share the news. My mother answered on the second ring. "Third in the city?" she repeated, her voice rising with excitement. "Sweetheart, that's wonderful. Your father is going to be so proud. Hold on, let me put you on speaker." "We always knew you were brilliant," my father's voice joined the conversation. "But third in the entire city. That puts you in range for any university you want." In my previous life, this conversation had never happened. Instead, I had eventually confessed my poor performance in a tearful phone call where I made excuses about test anxiety and promised to do better next time. "I'm thinking about applying to Peking University," I said, the words feeling bold and strange in my mouth. "Of course you are," my mother replied immediately. "With scores like these, why wouldn't you aim for the best?" After we hung up, I sat on my dormitory bed, feeling something I couldn't quite name. It took me several minutes to realize what it was. Genuine pride in my own accomplishments, uncontaminated by guilt or shame, or the need to diminish my success to make someone else feel better. That evening, word of the exam results had spread throughout the school. Students who had barely acknowledged my existence before now looked at me with something approaching respect. Teachers who had dismissed me as average suddenly seemed interested in my university plans, but the most satisfying change was in how people began to look at Chenwei. "I heard his girlfriend is reconsidering their relationship," Liu Mei reported during dinner. Li Xulan apparently expected him to score much higher, especially after all the tutoring he claimed to have received. Tutoring he claimed to have received? From you. He's been telling people for weeks that you helped him prepare extensively for this exam, so his poor performance makes it look like either you're a terrible tutor or he's a terrible student. Liu Mei grinned. "Since everyone knows you scored third in the city, the answer seems pretty obvious." I took a bite of my rice, savoring both the food and the irony. Chenwei's attempt to take credit for my teaching had backfired spectacularly when he couldn't produce results without my actual help. "There's more," Liu Mei continued. "Zhang Wei told me that several teachers have been asking questions about Chenwei's previous high scores. Apparently they're wondering how someone who performed so poorly on a standardized exam could have done so well on classroom assignments." The implication was clear. Teachers were beginning to suspect that Chenwei's academic success had been built on borrowed work and collaborative efforts that he had misrepresented as individual achievement. My phone buzzed with a text message from Chenwei. "I know you're probably happy about my poor performance, but this could ruin my chances at any decent university. Can we please talk? I need your help." I read the message twice, marveling at his ability to make his academic failure somehow about my emotional state. Even in desperation, he couldn't resist implying that my success was driven by petty satisfaction rather than genuine effort. I deleted the message without responding. In my previous life, I would have felt guilty about his struggles and found a way to help him recover. I would have convinced myself that his failure reflected poorly on my teaching abilities and that I bore some responsibility for his poor performance. But this time, I understood that Chen Wei's academic struggles were simply the natural consequence of never learning to succeed without exploiting others. And that was not my problem to solve. The announcement came during morning assembly, 2 weeks after the mock exam results. Principal Wang stood at the podium, holding a formal-looking document with an official seal. The Beijing Education Foundation has informed us that our school has been selected to nominate one student for the prestigious Academic Excellence Scholarship, he announced. This scholarship provides full tuition, living expenses, and research stipend for any university in China, including Peking University and Tsinghua. A murmur of excitement rippled through the assembled students. I felt my heart skip a beat. In my previous life, this scholarship had gone to a student from a different school entirely. Our school had never even been considered for the nomination. The scholarship will be awarded based on a combination of standardized test scores, academic consistency, and a personal interview with the foundation board, Principal Wang continued. Students interested in applying should see me after assembly. However, I should note that, realistically, only our top performers need apply. I caught Liu Mei's excited glance from across the auditorium. With my third-place city ranking, I was clearly qualified. But as we filed out of the assembly hall, I noticed Chen Wei pushing through the crowd toward the principal's office. "You're going to apply, right?" Liu Mei asked as we walked toward our first class. "Absolutely. The scholarship would change everything for my family. We wouldn't need to worry about university tuition or living expenses. I could focus entirely on my studies without working part-time jobs." "Good. You're practically guaranteed to get it with your scores." Liu Mei lowered her voice. I saw Chen Wei heading toward Principal Wang's office, too. That's going to be awkward. It was more than awkward. It was insulting. That afternoon, I submitted my application along with my academic transcripts and 3 letters of recommendation. One from Professor Wang, one from Teacher Huang, and one from the guidance counselor who had been so surprised by my transformation this semester. As I left Principal Wang's office, I found Chen Wei waiting outside, clutching his own application materials. "I suppose you think this scholarship belongs to you," he said, without preamble. "I think scholarships belong to students who earn them," I replied evenly. "Right. And I suppose my years of solid academic performance don't count for anything because of one bad test?" One bad test. In my previous life, I had used similar language to minimize my own failures, always finding external explanations for poor performance. Now I recognized it as the desperate reasoning of someone who couldn't face the truth about their abilities. "Chen Wei, your solid academic performance was built on other people's work. Everyone knows that now." His face flushed red. "That's a lie. I've always done my own work." "Have you? Then you should have no problem explaining to the interview board how you plan to succeed at university level without a personal tutor to carry you through every assignment." I walked away before he could respond, but his voice followed me down the hallway. "You're going to regret treating me like this. I have connections you don't even know about." Connections. In my previous life, Chen Wei had occasionally hinted at his family's influence when he wanted to seem more important than he actually was. I had never paid much attention to his boasting, but now I wondered what he might be planning. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 days later, I arrived at school to find my locker had been broken into again. This time, my scholarship application portfolio was missing, the backup copies I had prepared in case anything happened to the original submission. But more troubling was the note left in its place. Scholarship interviews require perfect conduct records. Some students might find their past indiscretions coming to light at unfortunate times. I stared at the note for a long moment, feeling a familiar chill of recognition. In my previous life, Chen Wei had used similar veiled threats when I had briefly considered joining activities or friendships that didn't include him. He had always managed to find ways to undermine my confidence in pursuing independent goals. But this felt different, more desperate and more dangerous. Another break-in? Liu Mei appeared beside my locker, frowning at the obvious signs of forced entry. Someone took my scholarship materials, I said, showing her the note. This is starting to feel like harassment. Liu Mei read the threat carefully. What past indiscretions could they possibly be referring to? You're the most boring person I know. And I mean that as a compliment. I had no idea, which made the threat even more unsettling. In my previous life, I had been so focused on pleasing Chen Wei that I had never done anything remotely rebellious or questionable. My conduct record was spotless, unless someone was planning to manufacture evidence. That afternoon, I went directly to the principal's office and reported both the theft and the threatening note. Principal Wang examined the paper with obvious concern. "This is quite serious," he said. "Do you have any idea who might want to sabotage your scholarship application?" "I have suspicions, but no proof." "Well, fortunately, your original application is safe in our files, but I'm concerned about this threat regarding your conduct record. Is there anything in your past that could be used against you?" "Nothing that I can think of. I've never been disciplined or written up for anything." "Good. Then whoever wrote this is either bluffing or planning to fabricate evidence." Principal Wang locked the note in his desk drawer. "I'm going to inform the scholarship committee about this incident. Attempted sabotage of fellow students reflects very poorly on the perpetrator's character." As I left his office, I felt a grim satisfaction. Chen Wei's desperation was leading him to make increasingly reckless choices that would only damage his own reputation. But that evening, I discovered just how far he was willing to go. Jiang Wei called me during dinner, his voice tight with anger. "You need to know what Chen Wei is planning," he said without preamble. "I overheard him talking to Li Xulan about your scholarship application." "What did he say?" "He's claiming that you cheated on your practice exams by stealing answer keys from Professor Wang's office. He says he has evidence that you broke into the building after hours last month." My blood turned to ice. In my previous life, I had indeed stayed after hours in the academic building to tutor Chen Wei in empty classrooms when the library was too crowded. But those sessions could easily be misrepresented if someone wanted to suggest illicit activity. "There's more," Jiang Wei continued. "He's also telling people that you've been selling exam answers to other students for money. That's how he's explaining your sudden improvement in grades. He claims you've been cheating all along." The accusations were brilliantly crafted. They provided an alternative explanation for my academic success that would make my scholarship application null and void. And if Chen Wei had any evidence of my after-hours presence in the building, it might be difficult to disprove the claims entirely. "Did Li Xulan believe him?" I asked. "Actually, no. She told him it was ridiculous, and that he was obviously just jealous of your success. But he's not just telling her. He's been spreading this story to anyone who will listen." I hung up and sat in my dormitory room, staring at the wall and thinking furiously. In my previous life, this kind of character assassination would have devastated me. I would have panicked, tried to defend myself, and probably made the situation worse through my obvious desperation. But this time, I had something Chen Wei didn't expect. Preparation. I opened my laptop and accessed the folder where I had been documenting every suspicious incident since the beginning of the semester. Screenshots of his threatening messages, photographs of my damaged study materials, timestamps of when my locker had been broken into. More importantly, I had been quietly recording our conversations on my phone whenever he approached me, a precaution I had taken after the first sabotage incident. I scrolled through the audio files until I found the one I was looking for, Chen Wei's desperate plea for help after the mock exam results, where he had explicitly admitted that his poor performance was due to not having access to my insights and explanations. In his own words, recorded in his own voice, he had confessed that his previous academic success had been dependent on my assistance. I attached the audio file to an email and sent it to Principal Wang with a simple message. This recording was made 3 days after the mock exam. I believe it provides important context for understanding the recent accusations against me. Then I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Chen Wei wanted to play games with evidence and accusations? He was about to learn that I had been documenting his behavior far more carefully than he had been documenting mine. And unlike his fabricated claims about my conduct, my evidence was absolutely real. The explosion came during third period mathematics class. I was working through a particularly complex calculus problem when Teacher Li received a phone call that made her face go pale. She stepped into the hallway for several minutes, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. When she returned, her expression was grim. Chen Wei, please gather your things and report to the principal's office immediately. Your parents are waiting. The entire classroom fell silent. Chen Wei's face drained of color as he slowly packed his notebook and calculator. As he walked toward the door, I caught a glimpse of his expression, equal parts confusion and dawning panic. Liu Mei leaned over to whisper, "That didn't look good." She was right. In all my years at this school, I had never seen parents called in during class time unless something serious had happened. We didn't have to wait long to find out what that something was. By lunchtime, the rumors were flying through the cafeteria like wildfire. Zhang Wei found Liu Mei and me at our usual table, practically vibrating with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," he said, dropping into the chair across from us. Chen Wei's parents came to school because Principal Wang called them about the scholarship investigation. "Investigation?" I asked, though I suspected I knew where this was headed. "Apparently, the audio recording you submitted raised some serious questions about Chen Wei's academic integrity, so Principal Wang started looking into his previous assignments and exam performance more carefully." Zhang Wei grinned, and what they found was interesting. Liu Mei leaned forward. "How interesting?" "Remember that research paper Chen Wei submitted for Teacher Huang's literature class last month? The one that got him such high praise? Turns out significant portions of it were copied directly from your paper from sophomore year, with just enough changes to avoid obvious plagiarism detection." My breath caught. In my previous life, Chen Wei had asked to reference my old papers for inspiration when working on his assignments. I had been flattered that he valued my insights and had freely shared everything I had written. "There's more," Zhang Wei continued. "They also found evidence that Chen Wei has been submitting group project work as individual assignments, taking credit for other students' contributions. And his recent chemistry lab reports? Apparently, they contained analysis and conclusions that matched yours almost word for word." I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Chen Wei's academic success had been built on systematic plagiarism and credit theft, but he had been clever enough to spread his sources across different classes and time periods to avoid detection. "What did his parents say when they found out?" Liu Mei asked. "That's where it gets really ugly. Chen Wei tried to claim that you had given him permission to use your work, that it was all just collaborative studying that got misunderstood." Zhang Wei shook his head. "But then Principal Wang played your recording, where Chen Wei explicitly admits that he needed your insights and explanations to succeed, made it pretty clear that the collaboration was entirely one-sided." I remembered that moment, Chen Wei's desperate confession after the mock exam, his admission that he couldn't perform without my intellectual labor. At the time, I had been focused on his entitlement and manipulation. I hadn't realized I was documenting a pattern of academic fraud. "His mother apparently started crying," Zhang Wei continued. "She kept asking how long this had been going on, and whether any of his achievements were actually his own. His father just sat there, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The image was both satisfying and oddly uncomfortable. In my previous life, I had met Chen Wei's parents several times, and they had always been kind to me, if somewhat dismissive of my importance in their son's life. They had genuinely believed in his academic potential. But the worst part, Zhang Wei said, lowering his voice, is what happened when Principal Wang asked Chen Wei to explain the cheating accusations against you. What did he say? He couldn't provide any evidence. When pressed, he admitted that he had heard rumors, but couldn't name specific sources or provide proof. Principal Wang told him that making false accusations to undermine a scholarship competitor constituted serious academic misconduct. Zhang Wei paused for dramatic effect. Chen Wei is being suspended for a week pending a full disciplinary review, and his scholarship application has been withdrawn. The cafeteria noise faded into background static as the full implications hit me. Chen Wei's desperate attempt to destroy my chances had instead exposed his own fraudulent academic record. His parents now knew that their son was not the brilliant student they had believed him to be, but rather a plagiarist who had been stealing other people's work for years. "There's something else," Zhang Wei said quietly. Li Shulan was apparently in the hallway when Chen Wei's parents arrived. She heard everything. I looked up sharply. Everything? Principal Wang's explanation of the plagiarism evidence, Chen Wei's attempts to blame you for his poor performance, his parents' reactions when they realized how extensive the cheating was. Zhang Wei nodded grimly. She looked like someone had just told her that her boyfriend was actually a complete fraud, which I guess is exactly what happened. That afternoon, I was called to Principal Wang's office for a private meeting. He sat behind his desk with a thick folder of documents spread in front of him. What I assumed was the evidence of Chen Wei's academic misconduct. "I want to apologize to you personally," he said, without preamble. "The accusations made against you were completely unfounded, and I'm sorry you had to endure that stress during such an important time." "Thank you, sir. More importantly, I want you to know that the scholarship committee has been informed of the attempted sabotage of your application. They were quite impressed by how you handled the situation, documenting evidence, maintaining your composure, and allowing the truth to speak for itself." He smiled. Those are exactly the qualities they look for in scholarship recipients. I felt something warm and bright bloom in my chest. In my previous life, adults had rarely acknowledged my capabilities or character. I had existed in the background while Chen Wei received praise and recognition. "Your interview has been scheduled for next week," Principal Wang continued. "Given your academic performance and the way you've conducted yourself during this difficult situation, I'm confident you'll represent our school well." As I walked back to my dormitory, I passed Chen Wei's usual hangout spot near the basketball courts. He was sitting alone on a bench, staring at his phone with the expression of complete defeat. His teammates were practicing nearby, but none of them had approached him. Word of the suspension and plagiarism allegations had clearly spread. For a moment, I felt an unexpected twinge of something that might have been pity. In my previous life, I had loved this boy enough to sacrifice my own dreams for his success. Seeing him isolated and humiliated felt strange, like watching a house burn down that you had once called home. But then I remembered the cruel words he had spoken when he discarded me. "You're just dead weight now." I remembered dying alone in the rain while he celebrated with his new girlfriend. I remembered every night I had stayed awake tutoring him while my own grades suffered. The pity evaporated, replaced by cold satisfaction. Chen Wei had finally been forced to face the natural consequences of his choices. No one had destroyed his academic career. He had built it on stolen foundations and watched it collapse under its own false weight. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Li Shulan. I owe you more than an apology. Would you be willing to meet?" I think there are some things you should know about Chen Wei that go beyond what happened at school today. I stared at the message for a long moment, curiosity warring with indifference. In my previous life, Li Shulan had been the symbol of everything I wasn't good enough to be. Now she seemed to be reaching out to me as someone who could provide insight into Chen Wei's true nature. But I was no longer the girl who needed external validation or who felt compelled to help others understand what I had learned through painful experience. I typed back quickly. I appreciate your concern, but I'm moving forward with my own life now. I hope you find the answers you're looking for. Then I deleted her contact and put my phone away. Whatever additional revelations Li Shulan had discovered about Chen Wei's character were no longer my concern. His downfall was complete, his manipulation tactics exposed, and his academic future ruined by his own choices. I had more important things to focus on, like preparing for the scholarship interview that would secure the bright future I actually deserved. I should have known that Chen Wei's suspension wouldn't be the end of it. 3 days before my scholarship interview, I arrived at school to find my locker broken open yet again. This time, however, something was different. Instead of items being stolen, something had been added. Tucked inside my mathematics textbook was a USB drive that hadn't been there before, along with a note written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Insurance policy. You know what this contains. Withdraw your scholarship application, or everyone will know what kind of person you really are. I stared at the USB drive with a mixture of confusion and growing unease. What could Chen Wei possibly have fabricated that would be damaging enough to threaten my scholarship? In my previous life, I had been so focused on pleasing him that I had never done anything remotely scandalous. But then I remembered his desperation, his family's humiliation, and his suspension from school. A person facing complete academic ruin might be willing to manufacture evidence that didn't exist. I immediately took the USB drive and note to Principal Wang's office. He examined both items with obvious concern. "This is escalating beyond simple harassment," he said grimly. "Have you checked what's on this drive? I thought it would be better to involve you before accessing any potential evidence." Smart thinking. Principal Wang inserted the USB drive into his computer, and we both watched as several video files appeared on the screen. The first file made my blood run cold. It was security camera footage from the academic building, showing me entering after hours on multiple occasions over the past 2 years. But the timestamps had been altered, and accompanying audio had been added that made it sound like I was talking to someone about getting the answers and making sure no one finds out. "This is completely fabricated," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Yes, I was in the building after hours, but I was tutoring Chen Wei. The audio has been added artificially." Principal Wang nodded. "The video quality changes when the audio plays, which suggests editing. But this is quite sophisticated for a student to produce." The second file was even more disturbing. It appeared to show me accepting money from another student in exchange for what looked like exam materials. But as I watched more carefully, I realized the exam materials were actually my old homework assignments, and the student paying me was actually returning a textbook I had lent him. "This is my previous tutoring work with Chen Wei and other students," I explained, "but someone has edited out all context and added narration to make it look like I was selling exam answers." The third file was the most damaging. It showed me photographing what appeared to be test papers in an empty classroom. In reality, I remembered that moment clearly. I had been copying practice problems that Professor Wang had written on the blackboard for our advanced study group. But in the video, added audio made it sound like I was photographing actual exam questions. "Whoever created this spent considerable time and effort," Principal Wang observed. "This isn't the work of an amateur." "Chen Wei couldn't have done this himself," I agreed. "He doesn't have the technical skills for this level of video editing." Which raises the question of who might have helped him and why they would go to such lengths. That afternoon, Liu Mei found me in the library, looking unusually agitated. "You need to know what people are saying," she said, without preamble. "Someone has been showing these videos to other students, claiming they prove you've been cheating all along." My stomach dropped. "How many people have seen them?" "Too many. Zhang Wei said they're being shared through social media and messaging apps. Some students are starting to believe that your high scores were the result of having access to exam questions in advance." This was Chen Wei's endgame. He couldn't restore his own reputation or academic standing, but he could try to destroy mine through fabricated evidence that would be difficult to disprove quickly. Even if the videos were eventually proven false, the damage to my scholarship prospects could be irreversible. "There's something else," Liu Mei continued. "Li Xulan approached me during lunch. She says she knows who helped Chen Wei create these videos, and she wants to talk to you." What could she possibly know? She wouldn't give me details, but she seemed genuinely upset. She said Chen Wei had asked her for help with computer skills last week, and she's beginning to understand what he really wanted. That evening, despite my earlier resolution to avoid Li Xulan, I agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe off campus. She arrived looking uncharacteristically disheveled, her usually perfect appearance showing signs of stress. "I need to tell you something," she said, without preamble. "And I need you to know that I had no idea what Chen Wei was really planning when I helped him." She pulled out her laptop and opened a video editing program that I recognized as quite expensive and sophisticated. Chen Wei told me he wanted to create a presentation about study techniques for a class project. He asked if he could use my editing software and if I could teach him some basic functions. Li Xulan's voice was tight with guilt. I showed him how to layer audio tracks, adjust timestamps, and combine different video sources. The pieces fell into place. Chen Wei had manipulated Li Xulan into giving him the technical knowledge needed to fabricate evidence against me, all while making her believe she was helping him with legitimate schoolwork. "When did you realize what he had actually done?" I asked. "Yesterday, when I saw the videos being shared online. I recognized the editing techniques I had taught him, and I remembered him asking specifically about how to make seamless audio additions and timestamp modifications." She looked up at me with obvious shame. "I helped him create weapons to destroy you, and I didn't even know it." I studied her face, noting the genuine distress in her expression. In my previous life, Li Xulan had been a symbol of everything I envied: beauty, wealth, social connections. Now she seemed like just another person who had been manipulated by Chen Wei's calculated charm. "Can you help me prove the videos are fabricated?" I asked. "I can do better than that." Li Xulan opened another folder on her laptop. "I kept backups of all the project files when I was teaching Chen Wei how to use the software. I have the original source materials he used, along with timestamps showing when the edits were made." She showed me the evidence: raw security footage without added audio, the original context of each scene, and metadata proving when the fabricated versions had been created, all within the past week, well after the events they purported to document. "Why are you helping me?" I asked quietly. "Because I finally understand what you tried to warn me about. Chen Wei doesn't see people as individuals. He sees them as resources to be exploited for his benefit. You were his academic resource, and I was his technical resource." She closed the laptop with a decisive snap. I refused to be anyone's unwitting accomplice in destroying an innocent person. The next morning, I arrived at Principal Wang's office with Li Xulan and her evidence. Within an hour, the fabricated videos had been thoroughly debunked, and Chen Wei's final desperate gambit had collapsed completely. But more than that, Li Xulan's testimony revealed the true extent of his manipulation. He hadn't just stolen my academic work, he had systematically used everyone around him as tools to achieve his goals, discarding them when they were no longer useful. "This constitutes serious fraud and harassment," Principal Wang said after reviewing all the evidence. I'm recommending that Chen Wei be expelled from school and barred from applying to any university for 1 year. His actions go far beyond normal academic misconduct. As we left the principal's office, Li Xiulan turned to me with a rueful smile. I owe you more than an apology. You tried to warn me about who he really was, and I was too proud to listen. You listened eventually, I replied. That's what matters. But as I walked back to my dormitory, I realized that Li Xiulan's help, while appreciated, hadn't been necessary. I had already documented enough evidence of Chen Wei's previous misconduct to discredit his accusations. Her assistance had simply made the process faster and more decisive. In my previous life, I had been helpless against Chen Wei's manipulation because I had never seen it coming. This time, I had been prepared for his escalation and ready with counter-strategies. Chen Wei's final attempt to destroy me had instead sealed his own fate, and unlike my past life, where his success had come at my expense, this time his downfall was entirely self-inflicted. The scholarship interview was tomorrow, and for the first time since my rebirth, I felt completely free from Chen Wei's shadow.